Okay, so we are now coming up on our grand finale event. This is the ecosystem pitch event. And the five finalists they've been working on their presentations very crazily for the past couple hours. Why don't I go ahead and invite up the panelists to come up here. You want to come up? Yep. And just to explain the process, we've got 5 folks. They'll each do 5-minute pitches. And we'll have 5 minutes of feedback. That'll be the panelists. If there's extra time after the panelists have their say, we can also see if there's time to take a comment or two from the audience, but I can't promise that. And then we'll do that 5 times. So that's the process. Yep. And Carol's going to come back up here, and Nashin's going to come up here. Okay. I'm going to introduce our first presenter. And there's no winners or losers here, right? We're all winners in life. But they're going to have a chance to talk, and we're going to hear feedback from them. The first one is Ahmed Zahran. Ahmed?
Yeah. Hi. So I come from Egypt, and when we started to work on what we were developing, the concept, we called it disconnected development. And I know that the name sounds a bit negative or weird, but there was a story behind that name. And in order to tell you the story, I have to tell you some things about Egypt first. So I love maps, because when you look at maps, you can really read a lot of things, and you can find a lot of stories. And the map of Egypt is like that. It's a very beautiful map. It's a very simple one as well. Egypt is almost a square, and you have the Nile Valley and Delta in the middle. They look like a lotus flower. Really, it's very close to a lotus flower. And the rest is desert, and then you have the Mediterranean in the north, and you have the Red Sea at the east. So the Nile Valley and the Delta are around 8% of Egypt's area. And that's where, really, the 7,000 years of civilization happened just in those 8%, nothing more. So 3 civilizations that Egypt established happened only in that tiny space. And in order to get an idea about that space, it's more or less equal to the size of the Netherlands. Only it hosts 85 million people. So whenever the government was thinking about expanding, because obviously that was hugely dense and populated, and when you have so much density and population, it tends to hinder innovation, because people tend to focus on solving their survival problems and daily problems, which really increase because of traffic and limited resources and building on agricultural land and so on. So they started building new cities, but in order to build a new city, you have to extend the water grid, the energy grid, the sewage grid to those places. So because they did not have so much money, they were establishing new cities very close to the Nile Valley and Delta. So after 40 years, those cities became suburbs of the existing urban place. And they added to the existing problems. So traffic problems were magnified, and all the kind of trouble that we had became worse. It did not really solve the problem. So we decided to work on disconnected development, which was basically doing the exact opposite. So we thought, how do we develop cities without having to extend any of those grids to those new cities? Because we realized that really the most expensive thing about establishing any of those cities are those grids. So we decided that instead of building cities that are very close to the Nile Valley, we have to develop a way by which we are able to do that in the middle of the desert. And that black spot over here is the place that we're currently starting. So it is literally in the middle of the desert, in a place called the Black Desert. But the difference is that it's a place that makes sense. It's a place that has a purpose. So all the cities that were established by the government, they are located there only because they're very close to the Nile Valley, not because there is a purpose behind it. Because each city should have a purpose, and each city should have a raison d'être, a reason why it exists in this place and not anywhere else. And that's what we've been working on. So what we do is that we use solar energy in order to develop tools that would enable Egyptians to build cities in the middle of the desert without having to extend the water grid, the energy grid, or treat the water. So, of course, when we were working on that, we realized that you can't really go to the market and say that you're going to be implementing this connected development and talk about the vision, because it's very difficult for the people. So we decided that instead, we have to identify an economic activity that is happening in a place away from the existing urban space and work on that. Take it as a starting point. And we realized that we could have two starting points. In the desert, away from the coast, this would be agriculture, because most of the agricultural expansion in Egypt is currently happening in the desert because of the good soil and the availability of underground water, or by the coast where you have tourism. So we came up with an off-grid, high-capacity solar water pumping system that pumps the water from the underground. Because we realized that this is the single most consumer of diesel in the country. And we actually won the Wharton University Innovation Award for doing that. So the whole idea was start by developing small tools and all have the same concept, converting from fossil fuels to renewable energy, and they would all enable the people to establish new cities in the desert. Thank you.
You want to start over there? Okay, start with Juan Carlos.
Thank you, Victor, and thank you for the honor of being here. Well, first, I think it's a great idea, a fantastic project, very original, and I mean, I'm trying to give you some quick feedback. I was told to give you a Twitter-sized feedback, okay? So don't misinterpret me, but if I have to say one thing, I would say, in the light of what we discussed these past days, that a risk for this project, if I have to identify the risks, you know, if I want to be convinced, is that I see it as very top-down, okay? And my first question is there anybody really going to move to this city, no matter how wonderful the technology? You know, because people tend to love the cities no matter how crowded they are in the end. It's their city. So a whole new city is a proposition that has not worked that well in other places. Some countries have attempted that in the middle of the jungle or in the middle of so many places, and it hasn't worked always. So that would be my observation. How would you mitigate that risk?
So we are like minds. My question was going to be framed slightly differently, but gets to a similar point, which my question was, who's the customer? So are you building this on behalf of the government in order to depopulate or allow for growth and expansion, in which case it becomes that top-down? Or is there actually a demand from people who are in the cities? In which case, who would you go to get the input you need to design what it is you need to make the city? And with that said, I think there's a second interesting conundrum you might face, which is the technologies you'd be developing probably have huge application in other areas that are already well developed. And so there would be definitely a potential for loss of focus as places like, say, Phoenix, Arizona or something would see the kinds of tools you are creating as being perhaps more sustainable and more viable for their environment as well. And so how do you stay on purpose and on mission? So that would be kind of the question.
First of all, thank you very much and congratulations for an amazing project and having gotten the most votes. I have just one quick question, is who are your collaborators on this idea? So we've been talking for the last 2-3 days on none of these ideas are viable or sustainable if you don't network and collaborate with different types of stakeholders to make your idea a reality. So who, in your view, you'll be collaborating with?
You want to take 30 seconds to address any of these points?
For all the questions.
For all the questions, yeah.
Okay, so it is actually market-driven. So we are responding to an existing need, and there are two needs. One that exists in the desert or on the coast. Many investors want to work on agriculture, but they have a problem of temporary labor, and they want them to settle there. But they cannot settle there because there is no infrastructure to do that. So we are providing the infrastructure that would help in developing that, which is providing solar energy and water. Tourism. Lots of investors want to do many things by the coast, but they cannot because they cannot get the diesel or drinking water over there. And the same kind of technology we're using is actually currently being implemented for solar water desalination of the seawater. In terms of partnerships, we never work alone. For each and every, we have many solutions for the buildings, for the technologies, and so on. And for each and every one of them, we try to look for partners, either inside Egypt or outside, so that we would work with them on that. And for the first project we're establishing, we're actually inviting other partners to come and show off what they can do at our place, because it is really in the heart of the market. So if it clicks, there's a huge potential.
I guess I just asked the question of, it sounds then like it is driven by a demand that you're seeing, particularly from the corporate world. How do you anticipate it will affect sort of the social environment, and will it become sort of a different form of migrant worker camp, or will it actually become vibrant cities?
There is the model of Masdar City, which I think is a flawed model, and based on having shitloads of money that you don't know what you want to do with.
We'll edit that.
And I'm sorry, I'm politically incorrect all the time. I was part of the revolution, so those things do not come through. And there's the other way of letting the city grow organically. So all you need to do is provide the things that would enable the people to go there. I know many people who want to move out of Cairo and Alexandria, but simply there is no place to go. And I know many projects that can happen in those places because there are so many resources, but they're failing to attract people because they cannot sustain living over there. We want to be the connector of those people. We want to create a model that actually provides a higher living standard in the middle of the desert and done in a sustainable way.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks.
Our second presenter is Brian Gann. Nope. All right, Islam Khalil.
Actually, I don't need this one. I think this should be. Does it work? Doesn't work.
Go.
Okay, great. I'm Islam Khalil from Egypt, and actually, we believe that our project is targeting some of the biggest three challenges facing humankind. It's water, food, and money. What we try to do is basically help people save on their water resources and be more efficient in using their water, be more efficient and effective in the agricultural practices, and therefore getting more yield more yield per water use and per land use, and at the same time save cost in general of the agricultural process. What we are doing is we're using the cloud-based technology and mobile framework to take the precision agriculture technology, which is an agricultural technology that is well established, that helps people basically be more efficient in agriculture. And we're taking this technology, putting it on the cloud, and operating in a business model that is easier to adopt for small and medium farmers. And we're hoping that by doing this, we try to make it available to a larger segment of farmers instead of being a technology that is only affordable by the biggest multinational companies or the biggest agricultural firms. So basically what we do, we have a number of components in our project. One of them has to do with market prices and transparency. The other has to do with irrigation efficiency and cloud-enabled weather sensor stations. And another part has to do with disseminating proper agricultural knowledge. So helping people do the proper agricultural practices, this is one part, and saving money using our work. We believe that this is important because we're starting our implementation in Egypt, and we're hoping to start rolling out in other countries. Some of our components are in beta, and others are still under development. And we are starting with Egypt. We have a lot of need actually for saving water and for food, and we have a lot of uncultivated land, as Ahmed was just saying in the previous project. And many parts of the Western Desert and Sinai Peninsula and other different parts. And we hope that this will empower us to do more agriculture. So that's one part. Regarding your question on partnerships, we're collaborating on different parts of the scope because we believe that there's a synergy between the two projects. So we are one of the partners in the Egyptian ecosystem. So I've tried to be. I took half of the time.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I have a lot of questions.
Yeah, sure.
But
we have a lot of time.
My first question to you is why did you start in Egypt? I believe you're Egyptian. And where do you think about scaling it up? And the third question is, how does this impact the lives of the poorest and most vulnerable?
Okay. Shall we answer question by question or take all the questions once and then? Yeah, okay. Regarding starting in Egypt, it's a proximity thing. We're based in Egypt, so it's easier to pilot things and implement them in Egypt first, and then roll them out in different countries. So that's one part. Regarding impacting the lives of the poorest, we have about 4.5 million farmers, and more than 95% of these farmers are planting land that is less than 5 acres. So basically, they will never be able to afford expensive technology. They will never be able to buy servers, buy software, have an IT infrastructure, all these. So by taking all of this and putting it on the cloud, we are empowering them. It's just like Hotmail. They don't have to have a mail server. They don't have to have an IT department, or like Gmail. They don't have to have anything. They just use it in a pay-as-you-use model, in a service model. So we've eliminated the upfront capital expenditure required to adopt the technology, and we've transformed it into a small recurring fee. So that's one part. Actually, I'll just add a tiny piece. Another thing is, one of the biggest pains that we've noticed in Egypt is the lack of transparency with regards to market pricing. And a lot of the small farmers, they don't sell their crops at an adequate price just because they don't know the prices in the markets. And for this reason, we have a component that provides transparent market prices. And it provides it in the whole system actually works on different technologies depending on the farmer's level of technological awareness. If they can use a computer, they can use everything over a computer. If they don't, then they can use a smartphone. If they don't have a smartphone, many of our features are still accessible over a feature phone using SMS and voice. So we're catering to, we're trying to be a central hub for aggregating all the agricultural info and disseminating the agricultural info to the farmers on the platform that they are comfortable using.
Thank you.
I had 3 questions as well. Okay. The first is, there are a lot of folks who are working around the world, obviously, in things around improving agricultural processes, particularly for smallholder farmers. I'm curious, where are you drawing your technology from? Are you leveraging what others have done? Or are you having to invent the technology yourself? The second question is around how you're going to measure success. So what would be your endpoint of success, and do you have plans to measure it in a way that will allow you to demonstrate to others and therefore get additional funding and resources as you need it? And then the third piece is, you alluded to, but I wasn't quite clear on the business model, if it's going to become self-sustaining through a fee-based mechanism, and do you think it'll be a for-profit or not-for-profit?
Okay, great. So the first one regarding the technology, the IT component of the technology, we're developing it. We're software companies, and we've been doing a lot of work related to software as a service and application as a service. And this model itself, we're very comfortable, and we've provided a lot of service on that. That's one thing. This is the technical part. The agricultural component, we're actually talking to a number of partners in the agri field in order to cooperate with them on the technical agri know-how. So that's one part. The third, because I remember the third first. The third question is related to sustainability. The second one is the success criteria. We're not an NGO or a donor agency, so basically, if we can sell and make profit, we're successful. If our product is lousy and it's not useful, sorry? Yeah, exactly. So if our product is a lousy product, nobody will buy it, and we won't be successful. So that's an easy way to measure it. Regarding the third part,
the business model, exactly. And you told me, so that's great.
Well, again, congratulations. It looks like a great project. My question, after all the clarifications that were very important here, I will have one question remaining, and that is that I would like to know about what is the baseline in the sense that what is the situation right now? Because one way to understand what you're trying is to make, the peasant or the farmer technologically aware or innovation aware in a situation, starting with a situation where there was no technological or innovation advice whatsoever to these people. However, I don't know Egypt. I work in the Inter-American Development Bank in Latin American projects. But in Latin America, what you normally find is that when you try to do something like that, you are trying to replace with technology what was already being done by people, because there is a huge tradition of agricultural extensionism that was actually relatively effective in most cases. So my question would be, are you operating in a vacuum, in a situation which is either you or no advice, or are you in the end replacing a corpse of public or private extensionists that was there before and was or was not working? So, because that's important for measuring the success.
Okay. I can answer this question in two parts. The first part is we want to operate independently from the government and not be dependent on the government, and which is the government that runs the extension services. The government which runs the extension services, as you know, we've had a revolution, and we're still waiting for trying to have a new government. And things have, our government is basically on a holiday for some time. I don't know when they will be back. So basically, this is, so we don't really.
So you are in a vacuum.
we don't really want to wait for them. We want to proceed. We are already proceeding and everything, and we're providing our services independently of the government. However, our final target is we want to support the government's extension services. So the ideal situation for us, and that's basically what we started talking to some of the people in the government about, is to have the extension people, the extension experts, use our framework to disseminate the information that they have. Additionally, actually, we are starting to talk to suppliers, to actually people in the value chain, customers who buy agricultural products, in order to use our framework also to disseminate info to farmers that are being contracted by them. So basically, if you are a large company and you contract a lot of farmers, you can use our platform to disseminate info to and best practices to your farmers. So
thank you, Islam. It's fantastic.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You can tell how passionate he is because he started on this side of the stage, and as he kept talking, he got closer and closer to us. Next, it's a chance for Erin Singer to make her daddy proud.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start by asking you all a simple question to demonstrate the general experience I'm going to talk about. How many of you have ever been to primary school? Put up your hands. Excellent. So this applies to all of you. And you can be tweeting, but otherwise pay attention, please. All right, so the problem I'd like to address is the one that we're focused on during this summit, and that is cultivating innovation ecosystems. And I think that this really begins in primary school with our youngest learners. And the problem we see is that here's the average classroom setting. You have a teacher at the front of the room, and they could be lecturing the students or presenting them with an activity, but there's a clear distinguishment between that teacher and those students, which creates hierarchy. Secondly, the students are marked on absolute scales and not necessarily on feedback loops, as we discussed. That was one of the key aspects that Eleanor Ostrom highlighted of a successful innovation ecosystem. And the third thing is that students are only basically tested and asked to answer questions on material that they already know. And that creates this idea that, we get things shoved into our brains, we're tested on them, and we don't actually have to do much thinking for ourselves all the way through primary and secondary education. So I think the solution to this is applying the roots and the rules of the ecosystem that we have learned at this conference. Firstly, we need to break down social and professional hierarchy. And I think that, this might be a little controversial, but I think the hierarchy of the student-teacher relationship isn't necessary. I think that students can recognize on their own that their teacher has expertise and knowledge that they want to tap into. But instead of being a military-style commander, I think teachers should be seen more as mentors and friends. They should be sitting amongst the students and establish a camaraderie between the students and the teachers that'll make that transfer of knowledge even more effective. Secondly, I think that we should use a grand challenges approach. Here's my shameless plug for what my dad does. I think we should use a grand challenges approach in the classroom. Now, for those of you who don't know, the grand challenges approach began in 1900 when David Hilbert proposed a set of defined mathematical problems called the grand challenges in mathematics. And these problems kept mathematicians busy for a century. Then we saw Bill Gates apply this model to development and to global health, and now we have all sorts of organizations, USAID, Grand Challenges Canada, which are applying this model as well. I think this should start very early in life, in the primary school classroom. I think that before we teach students the skills they need to answer all the questions on their test, we should be giving them unfamiliar questions, unfamiliar situations. And the benefit of this is that they're exposed to failure very early, and you can positively reinforce that failure and that effort. I think that this teaches them one of the rules of the rainforest, which is an error, fail, and persist. And finally, I think we should create feedback loops by eliminating a grading system in primary school. I don't think a grade 3 student needs to know whether they're getting an A or a B if it's very clear from the feedback whether they have a long way to go or a very short way to go until they succeed. But if we're creating those feedback loops, then students are actually focusing on what they can do to improve themselves, and rather than just comparing themselves to their peers. So to close off, I'd like to mention my favorite movie, Meet the Robinsons. And I don't know how many of you have seen the children's animated movie, Meet the Robinsons. Probably not the majority. But the great narrative of this movie is about a young boy who is an inventor, and he has to try and try again and continues failing in his inventions, but then goes to the future and finds a culture where failure is encouraged. And the mother of the family he meets in the future said, "Let us congratulate Lewis on his brilliant failure and let it lead to success in the future." And that's what we should see in our classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. A new, eloquently stated model for primary education.
Wow. That's a tough one. Congratulations, first of all, on a brilliant presentation. And you just completely shamed me in being the focal point for science and technology and innovation in an organization. My colleague will tell me here, our organizations are so outdated when we hear presentations like this. And we should innovate inside before we try to ask others to innovate. And yes, when we do development and we try to encourage innovations, we think about higher education. And you're absolutely right. We should start from the very beginning. My question to you is, you talk about the primary education system. Is that a US system? The US primary education system is, from what I know, the most student-teacher interaction is the most advanced compared to other places, especially I work in Africa, and in Africa, rogue learning and the teacher being, the hierarchical relationship is much stronger than other education systems. So what's your take on that, and how should we go about it?
Yeah, so I'm speaking mainly from my experience. I have gone to an all-girls private school with the IB program all my life, so I'm very fortunate in that I have had the opportunity to be very interactive with my teachers, and this is in Canada, by the way. And I know that may be true in the US as well, but I actually went on a community service trip a couple of years ago to South Africa and worked in a primary school there. And that's where I really sort of got exposed to exactly what you're talking about, which is that students are at a completely different level than the teachers who are sort of in charge of them. So I don't think this is necessarily such a radical reform within North America, but as you mentioned, definitely in other countries around the world.
So I would echo, terrific presentation, incredible. Yeah. So you're talking about a pretty substantial social change. How do you think you would engage, and who would be your partners in enacting that kind of a social change?
Right, so I think that it's very important when you're proposing a social innovation, a social change like this, to be working with opinion leaders in communities. And from my experience, very strong opinion leaders are actually the universities within those communities. I know that Princeton University works very strongly with the primary schools in Princeton, New Jersey. Georgetown does the same thing for a lot of the primary schools in Washington, D.C. So I think that in addition to this being sort of a government Ministry of Education focus, I think it's really up to those opinion leaders who are going to be able to sway opinion, show the benefits of this innovation. It's really up to them to get people on our side.
Well, congratulations for the project and for the delivery.
Thank you.
I think that rather than ask you a question, I think that I will dare to present to you a possibility or perhaps a suggestion. You have just said that yours is mostly a social innovation. Since we have, mentioned all the time the word technology here, and since this relationship, this vertical relationship that you want to, change is so ingrained in the developing world, from my experience looking at schools, the area in which that starts to happen almost spontaneously, the breakdown of that hierarchy, is when information technology or technology gets into the classroom. Because the simple fact that the children really know more than the teachers.
Yeah.
So when a computer gets into a classroom, the teacher is really lost in the average in the developing world, and the one that knows what to do with it is the child. So spontaneously, there is an opportunity there. So my suggestion for you would be, why don't you try starting in that particular area, not because technology is magic or is going to increase knowledge or anything or improve the, the learning of subject matters, because I think it has the value is that it has the potential to break the relationship and channel it in a different way.
Definitely. That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
I have one more. I was sitting. I'm going to ask you a question I asked one of the other presenters, which is, what would be your measure of success, and how would you actually measure it?
Right. So I think it's a difficult thing because the outcome, the core outcome of this, suggestion would mainly be more innovations coming to venture capital firms for funding, more innovations, being commercialized and going to scale. And you really can't measure that in terms of the number of innovations, but I guess you can measure that we're sitting here today and this conference is 500 people or so now. Imagine a culture where everybody in the world is turned on to innovation, and we have a culture, or we have a conference that's 10,000 people in the room plus 20 million watching it worldwide. I think that would be the main measure of success, is that we've really fostered cultivated an innovation ecosystem.
Let me add one thought, an observation, which is I think it's a wonderful vision, and from an entrepreneur's perspective or a venture capitalist perspective, the trick now is to actually take this and prototype it, right, and test it in one place. Because what you find is that process of prototyping is so much harder than you think it is. Right. And you say it, but then you actually do it, and it's much, much harder. And then you learn a lot, and the prototype changes and morphs. And then if you prototype it, improve it, and you create metrics around that, then you can start to expand it, right? And then people gravitate towards it. In fact, you don't even need to push it anymore because the results start to speak for themselves. Right. But I'm sure you've thought of this as well. Maybe one thought from an audience member. Anyone? Yeah, right there. Sorry. Yeah, we have a mic. There you go.
So my name's Eliza Gonzalez, and I'm a student at Santa Clara University. And I just wanted to say I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, and I attended public school there. And the exact, I guess, what your education, I don't know, whatever the word is, just like the program. My elementary school was exactly that. We had the exact kind of relationship. We didn't have desks, we had tables and couches. We had that kind of relationship with our teachers, and we weren't graded. It was a bilingual elementary school. And so, I don't know, just the exact program that you're promoting is already implemented in some public schools in Boulder. So, I don't know, I just wanted to make that one comment.
And as we just talked about, prototyping, that's great to hear, because those are the sources you'll look to prove this concept to other people.
I wish we could take more questions, but we're going to have to move on to the next one. Thank you very much, Erin. It was great. Our next presenter is Brian Gann. Brian, welcome.
Come on, guys. Thank you, Victor. Hi, I'm Brian Gan from Malaysia. Let me tell you a story. Is it all right? Very short story about me, my innovation story. I graduated in 2002, 10 years ago, straight from university and ventured into my small software company. Okay, basically there wasn't any help. There are incubators in our local U, but they don't know what to do with it. They just left it empty. So for these past 10 years, I have 30, 50 failures. And I was trying so hard to get to Silicon Valley until I joined this U-Noodle camp, and it's brought me here. All right? So, thank you. So, 10 years have passed. What have we achieved in our local Malaysia, all the Silicon Valley or startups things? I would say we're still trying so hard. So the problem now is, how could we replicate Silicon Valley to any part of the world, especially to developing countries such as Ghana, Bangladesh, Nepal? Would you think is that easy? No, right? So they wouldn't have such fundings like Silicon Valley, billions of funding, infrastructures, high-tech industries, schools, and technology. So I would say, how could we solve that? I think the most important is we have to cultivate the spirits of innovations, educating the local community with the innovation process, educate them. How could they innovate their livings with the local resources that they have? Is that all right? Okay, you don't get me? For example, there are these entrepreneurs in Vietnam making slippers out of used tires. That is innovations. How many agree? All right? So, in Malaysia, we simplify the innovation process. We have this model called MESTI. Everyone say MESTI. It stands for M-E-S-T-I. M is mentorship. It stands for Mentor Ilmu Sistem Tindakan and Impian in Malay. Man is mentorship. E is knowledge. Systems. You need a business system. T is tindakan. Actions. You need to make the entrepreneurs take actions. Impian is the dream. So we sell this model called MESTI to our local entrepreneurs, and we really see great success. Housewives selling cupcakes, scarves from home, and they are making 30 to 50,000 a month. That is what we call innovations of the business process, how they can leverage on the local resources that they have and build a better living for themselves. So, what's our lesson here? I would say, if we are talking about bringing up all the infrastructures, high world-class infrastructures to those developing countries in short times, you see 10 years have passed in Malaysia, and I would say we are just beginning, all right? How long will it take for Africa's and some of the countries in Asia? Okay, 20, 30 years? So the first steps I think we should do is to seed the spirit of entrepreneurships and innovations into the local community, show them how they could innovate for better livings. We teach them how to fish and let them fish for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much for this presentation.
Welcome.
Glad to have somebody from Malaysia among us. And finally, I know what U-Noodle is, because I have been seeing U-Noodle being tweeted. So my first question is, how did you come up with that name? My second question...
Sorry, the first question?
How did you come up with that name? What is U-Noodle? What is U-Noodle?
Okay.
And the second question is, when you think about hearing a little bit more about your business model,
all right,
how do you see this impacting the lives of the poorest?
Okay.
You say empowering, let me elaborate a little bit more. You say empowering local communities to help themselves become entrepreneurs. I totally agree with you on that. And I think a lot of us in this room are trying to do exactly that. But putting that into practice, and if you wanted an organization like the one I work for to finance or to help co-finance a program, how would you say you're doing it in Malaysia?
Okay. Actually, I'm not part of U-Noodle's staff. I'm inside, came here, this is my 3rd week here in Silicon Valley, part of the innovation camps conducted by UNoodle. This is the t-shirts, but I can ask on on Rebecca's and UNoodle behalf. I can answer on her behalf. UNoodles, they were like something like, how do you noodle is something like how do you come up with ideas or something to bring startups to the great success, you know? So how can UNoodle help developing countries with ideas they want to innovate and bring it to the next level? For example, Rebecca has been traveling all over the world, gather like entrepreneurs from Mexico, Malaysia, Peru, Iceland, everywhere in the world from 13 countries. Come here, we learn how those startups work in Malaysia, no, in US, and then bring that back to Malaysia and train the people there. There are like hundreds and thousands of those startups are waiting to see what's the cool things, idea, business, how can they make the next Facebook, Instagram. So all this, we don't have the chance to learn that in Malaysia, and this is where UNoodle's camp is about. And it is going to like be a very, I think, a very successful thing for us. Yeah. Thank you.
So 2 questions, right? One is, first of all, I was curious what kind of tools you think you'd bring actually to those local environments that would actually change it to be a more innovation-oriented culture. And so what are the pieces of that? And then my second question is, who do you see as coming out of this? Do you see it as people who are going to be starting the next Facebook, or the people who are going to be starting the next Solar Sister, or the people who are going to literally be creating maybe informal type sector enterprise of their own, cupcake shop, I think was the example you used, or something like that. Yep. So maybe a mom and pop organization, or even just a mom organization. Yep. What do you see as the output?
Okay, I get the second question first. Okay, it's not necessary we make the next Facebook, but how do we leverage on what Facebook has done? So in my startup ideas, I leverage on the Facebook as a marketplace for small business, connecting each other, okay, so that they can tap on the fan base and the customers of each business, and that will help to help those small businesses to market and expand their customers widely, not just within their own community. So we could innovate something based on those like Facebook, Twitter, whatever technology that they have. So this is what I mean by leveraging on the local resources you have in those developing countries. And what are the tools that we are going to bring back is, I would say, is all the knowledge that we have learned, such as how to pivot from ideas to ideas, and also how's the funding mechanism work here, and also I would say what is the customer development model. So these kinds of model, we don't get that in developing countries as for now. So we come here, we learn, and we go back and teach them with all these tools.
I would like to insist a little bit on an earlier question, because I don't quite capture something important if I'm going to fund your project. It will be the business model. So when you say we first, who is we, and what kind of organization is it? Is it a commercial organization, for profit? Is it a non-for-profit? Is it a governmental institution? Okay. That's one thing. Sorry for my ignorance. I'm not familiar with it. Sure. Second would be, is this well, not sustainable? I think Greg used the word durable. So how is this set up so that it can continue or create a dynamic of its own without necessarily you being behind it and fueling additional resources every year to these people? Is there any kind of dynamic that will make it durable?
That's a tough question. Okay, I mean we is, I'm not like talking about my startup, my ideas, but how the ecosystems can be developed in Malaysia. And we is represents a pool of startups in Malaysia that needs help, how to make the next Silicon Valley stories happen in Malaysia. So, sustainable model, I would say we have to cultivate a series of I would say, training system, education systems, not in the university, but outside the university. The informal kind of educations where anybody, not necessarily they are very educated or literate, to follow this kind of innovations and entrepreneurship kind of process. Such as like in Vietnam, they are like making, making the slippers out of the used tire. So what are the process to help them to expand from a local market to a bigger market? So what are the process and tools? So we could develop such model and apply it in those countries.
I'd add, to follow up on Juan Carlos's comment, I think what we've learned a lot in the last couple of days is that ecosystem solutions need to be businesses in themselves, right?
Yep.
They need to be part of the value chain within the larger community. And so putting definition and some kind of structure and model around it actually it can be it makes it last beyond just goodwill, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you so
really
much.
appreciate it. And our fifth presenter, Sarah Day Evans. Yay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Victor and panel. It's super exciting to be here. I'm Sarah Day Evans from Asheville, North Carolina, in the western part of the state in the Appalachian Mountains. There, I have for many years have been working with rural and impoverished counties, introducing sustainability and helping them to become more sustainable. And the reason that I'm here at all is that in working with these regions, what I've seen is that to live off the land is to live in poverty in this region. Folks that are providing our food and our clothing and our furniture in a sustainable fashion are often living in poverty, and particularly our food. What this has inspired me to do is to build an accelerator for innovations in those target sectors of farming, fiber, and I mean fiber clothing, you techies, as well as forest products. That's the economy of that land and that place. And I'm very encouraged, actually, by what's been going on in Asheville, which has become a premier destination in the country for its local food scene. And I'm actually seeing farmers starting to get a leg up. I'm seeing a lot of young folks that want to go into farming and want to stay in that area. And so I'm looking for how we can help those folks to accelerate what they're doing through innovation so that they can stay in that region. Thus far, I've only been into this for 6 months. I'm highly encouraged and probably highly idealistic, but so far the local institutions, the Director for Entrepreneurship in Asheville is the one that got me here. Thank you, Pam Lewis, who's right here, and our local regional economic development folks and our local governments. Everybody's super excited about this idea, but it's still, in the idea stage. So I'm growing my team. I just connected with Eli from U-Noodle, who actually is a North Carolina young man, and he's super excited, has volunteered to be on my team as well. Again, I think that if we can succeed locally, regionally at this, I would love to see us launch this on an international scale, because Appalachia is not unique. We have to be fed, and we have to be clothed, and we have to have furniture to sit on. I'm seeing this being supported in this microcosm of Asheville and Western North Carolina, and I want to make that hub there thrive so that it can be replicated across the world. You think I'm being a Pollyanna? I hope so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I'm going to be asking you a tough question that I probably can't answer myself. We in global development, we define poverty as living under $1.25 a day. What is farmers living in poverty in your region mean
Generally, about $10,000 a year or less.
So my question is sort of about who you need to engage in order to make this happen, and who's the ultimate customer. If it is I wasn't entirely clear if it was a local-to-local sort of environment, so you want to create a local, sustainable environment where all products are local, or if in fact it's to create more of a manufacturing hub that might serve beyond. If it's local-to-local, then who are the stakeholders you need to engage in order to do that? And is there an economic base that can support the cost of that local-to-local if it drives up the cost of living for the individuals?
The accelerator itself is actually, the models that I'm looking at are the Unreasonable Institute and Village Capital. Unreasonable has a blend of regional as well as folks from outside the area that come in to be accelerated. And I'm actually thinking that it would be very valuable to bring in folks from other parts of the country and the world. Can we attract them? But because I think we tend to get a little myopic when we're just operating in that same circle. We have a lot of creatives there, but I think, I'm actually on my way to Unreasonable next to learn more about that. And I think that by bringing folks in from other parts of the world, that actually they can bring innovation and ideas to us that we could really benefit from. Does that answer your question?
I think it in part answers the question. I guess the question is, it sounds almost like a local development organization, right? Local civic development, local economic development board.
No, it's an accelerator. It's a nonprofit that I'm establishing with a for-profit arm.
But the purpose would be similar, it sounds like, to a local economic development, community economic development. So I'm based in Portland, Portland's economic development group. And if that's the case, I guess I'd ask the question of what can you learn from others who have been doing that in other cities? Probably the biggest parallel would be in smaller cities in the U.S.
Sure.
That might have a similar demographic. Or do you think that there's a different approach that hasn't been tried by other local economic development boards?
I think there's a different approach. I know those folks, and I actually used to work in that in government. I haven't seen an intensive, and this is an intensive residential accelerator where they actually live together for 10 weeks. We rotate mentors and folks with insight on capital. We were providing mentorship and access to capital to those businesses. And just to clarify as well, it wouldn't be so much for individual farmers, although they may have an innovation that will help other farmers. It's for those who are innovating that can help a broad group of farmers, sort of perhaps a distributor who needs mentorship and access to capital. So maybe that's more clear.
Well, thank you for your presentation. You have mentioned several times the word globally or global context or global models or global replication. So you're looking obviously at models around the world following the advice of the meeting that insisted on being global in so many ways.
Right.
Now, your situation strikes me as very similar to one that one finds in developing countries very often, which is that you have a highly depressed area, a poverty-stricken area, right next to a hub of high-tech development and prosperity, and that's exactly North Carolina, as far as I know.
Right.
So you have the other side of the state.
Yes.
Is famous for the research triangle, the huge research universities, and financial sector, pharma, whatever, you name it.
Right.
So my question would be, in addition to, not instead of, but in addition to looking globally, do you have a strategy, or do you think it would make sense, a strategy, or do you think it's hopeless, or is this, it's wasting your time to engage the other side of the state? Because they are in a way, they are still sort of local, relatively local resources that could have reasons to link, to network with you and what you're trying to do.
I absolutely have a strategy. I'm actually working, I'm being sponsored and supported by the North Carolina Rural Center, who actually brought me here as well. They are based in Raleigh, and they are a blended profit and nonprofit institution that actually has further reach than the state Commerce Department. So those folks are supporting me in this endeavor as well. And so I think it's very important to engage with the tech community when we talk about farming, and it's very earthy, but we are actually also collaborating with the newly developed tech accelerator that's launching in Asheville. I've just started having those conversations because I think a lot of the innovation is going to come through tech and you know, apps for who's your farmer, those sorts of things. Also, SoCap, which is the Social Capital Market Group, some of those folks have moved to Asheville and are also mentoring me, and they have asked me to participate in SoCap 12. So I'll be back to the Bay Area in October, but those are some of the sort of outside of Asheville networking that I'm doing.
One additional thought on this, which is a theme it seems kind of throughout several of these presentations, which is that specificity actually really matters in terms of what value you're trying to provide to others and whether they care about the value being received, and then whether others can contribute value and how can you draw those lines and put metrics around those. One thought is you didn't even use the word accelerator until we started getting into the questions, right?
Oh,
so, but
that's
anyways,
just my nervousness.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. So, but
thank you. I apologize for that.
But it helps actually. It shows that the interaction helps as well, because the interaction elucidates the real what you're really trying to get at. And the idea of a rural an accelerator for rural farmers is very interesting. And the question is, so how do you get that to work as a business to keep it sustainable so it's not constantly kind of drawing aid out of the system?
Good point. Good point. And I'm looking at sort of those businesses that are assisting the farmers in marketing and distribution who I've interacted with that seem to also need help to sort of get to that next stage. But it's an excellent point, and one that I will rely on my great team to also help me understand. Thank you, Victor.
Thank you, Sarah.
Team. Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
And let me thank this fantastic panel. This has really been a great educational process and a lot of fun. Thank you all. Yep.